Most people prep for interview questions, but they forget the most important part, making sure the job is right for them. If you've ever felt nervous before an interview, fumbled through a question you weren't ready for, accepted a job that seemed great but wasn't the right fit, this is for you. Now, before we dive in, I want you to grab a pen and paper. I know I'm going old school, but you're going to walk away with a strategy you can actually use for your next interview, and I want it to stick in your brain. It's called embodied cognition, but let's just say stick in your brain. Get the pen, get the paper. Okay. When you have your paper and pen ready, let me know by dropping something in the chat. And we're going to get started now. So, the first part of our 3-part interview mastery framework, and we like to call it rocking your interviews in our world because, Music City, and there's always guitars in the background. Star stories sell. So, to prepare for the interview, go bullet by bullet through the job posting. What's a story I could tell that proves I've done this or something really close? You use the STAR method. That's situation, task, action, result. One of my clients did this for an interview recently, and she said it was so game-changing because I had some imposter syndrome. I wasn't really sure, I had what they were looking for. And by the time I went through that process, I was like, my goodness, I've got it. I have all the stories. Another one of my clients was saying, I'm a little uncomfortable with the STAR method, and we had to shift the way she thought about it. She has another way she would tell her stories, but the point is to tell the story in a way that makes it easy for them to get it. That's the point. It's all about that. So here's an example. I led a cross-functional team. We had competing priorities. I implemented shared KPIs and weekly stand-ups. As a result, we delivered early and under budget. Win-win, right? I'd love to know in the comments, what's one bullet in a job posting you've seen recently that gave you pause? You were like, oh, whoa. And then what I want you to do is I want you to write it down, and I want you to think about what STAR story you'd use to answer it. And if you feel like you didn't do exactly that thing, I want you to think about the thing as close to that thing as possible. Because what we never do is say no, but. So if you've been following me for a while, you know that I've conducted over 12,000 interviews. I really should have a lot more gray hair than I do. Thank you to Jack Taylor and his genes. He turned gray at 70 and looks like I'm on the path. So anyway, 12,000 interviews is a lot of interviews, people. I've also taught hundreds of hiring managers and early career recruiters how to conduct interviews. When people work with me, they learn how to prepare for a world-class interview. And then when they don't get a world-class interview, they're really prepared. Works really well. So one of the things I'll never forget, I'm interviewing somebody for one of my venture-backed tech startup clients, and he must have said no, but 3 times as an answer. And at the end of the interview, I said, I'm going to give you some free coaching. Never, ever, ever answer an interview question again with no, but. So what do you do instead? You are, since you're preparing in advance, you're looking at the bullets. Anything you haven't done before, your job is to find the thing that proves that you can do that. What is the closest thing you've done? And tell your STAR story about that. Now, when you figured out what your bullet that really gave you pause was, and you've dropped that and you've crafted out your star story in your notes, let me know in the comments that you did that. And I want to know what's landing for you so far. What's your first aha? Now, you ready for step 2? You want to master your questions. So take note of this. You are interviewing them too. Most candidates forget that asking the right questions helps you spot red flags and avoid the wrong fit. Also, sometimes they're a connection opportunity. But here are my 6 interview questions that I recommend you ask. And then I'll tell you the really cool connect story from my 12,000 interviews. So if the interviewer, of course, you are looking at these people on LinkedIn before the interview. If you're not, write that down. Do it. If the interviewer has been at the company less than 2 years, you ask them, why did you join the company and what was the biggest surprise in your first 6 months? If the interviewer has been there more than 5 years, which certainly in the tech world is like a long, long, long time, you've been at the company for X years. What has made you want to stay or make the company name home? What has made you want to stay and make company X home? Then we've got my 2 favorite questions. What's the biggest challenge your team or the company as a whole, if it's a small company, is facing the next 6 months? And what's the biggest opportunity your team or the company as a whole, if it's small, is facing in the next 6 months? You don't ask them paired, you ask them separately. This is an opportunity to get intel that you can use to sell yourself to them. It also can tell you things about what the environment's going to be like. Those questions, the first 2 questions about why they joined the company and why they stayed, that can tell you whether it's actually going to be a good fit for you. If you ask a culture question, you're going to get BS. If you ask why the person joined the company and what surprised them, you might find out why you don't want to work there. When you find out why the interviewer stayed for more than 5 years, you may find out, oh my goodness, that sounds wonderful, a really good fit for me. Or, oh my goodness, that sounds horrible. So the first 2 questions are intel for your cultural fit. The second 2 are intel for you selling yourself to them. Now, one of my favorite things I do in my coaching business is I work with people in their career long game. So we're talking about where do we want to go and how are we going to get there? And at some point, there might be a job search involved, but it's very focused on the long game of your career. And we have all sorts of things we do in that process. I talk about that stuff once a week. It's going to be on Thursdays moving forward, starting next week. A good question, if you're thinking long game, and if you aren't, why aren't you? What % of leadership roles are filled internally? That tells you whether this company actually really is going to move the needle on moving your career forward in 2 ways. One is the experience you're going to get in this job and the opportunity to be promoted internally. Whereas some companies, you're only going to be using this experience at this next job to gain experience or branding for your long game, but you aren't going to have an opportunity to be promoted internally. We want to know that going in. And then I'm not really a fan of asking questions about their mission or values because, once again, my BS detector is super powerful. But if you really want to ask one, here's the best one to ask. Can you share a time when company values guided a tough decision? I actually think the most valuable part of that is not the values part, it's the tough decision and how they frame a tough decision. Now, I kind of went through the why. So we know the first 2 questions are more about company culture, and they're more valuable than direct questions about culture. The second 2, as I said, are about how to sell your value. The third is about your career long game, because you really got to get on that. And the last is to see if they actually practice what they preach. Now, I want you to make note, you're not asking about salary, you're not asking about benefits. Everything you say needs to sound like it's about them, even when you're actually asking questions that are about you vetting them. And obviously, don't ask anything that's easily Googleable, because you should do your homework. Now, I have a really great homework story. So I was interviewing sales leaders for a venture-backed tech startup. And I had a very different LinkedIn profile in those days, because I wasn't selling my coaching services. I had my coaching business, but it was my side gig. But in those days, my background image actually was a photo of the San Francisco Giants ballpark. And to this day, at the end of my about section, I do something that I tell all of my clients to do: entrepreneurs, career long game people, and my job seekers. And that is, you end your about section telling who you are as a human, but you do it in an entertaining way. So mine starts with, I've kept score at every baseball game I've been to since I was 12. Then that communicates I'm a serious sports fan. So even if you don't care about baseball, you probably can talk about football, basketball, and hockey, because I know more about baseball than most people, because most people can't keep score. And I do it not on an app, like with pen in a notebook, the old-fashioned way, the way the broadcasters do. Okay. Then I say, and you can't tell this today because I accidentally exposed myself to mold, but I'm actually a classical choral soprano. No, I sound like a baritone today, but I am. So for the artists and musicians, that's their way they connect with me. Then the way I used to have it in my profile was something about cooking with butter and bacon. Now I talk about my tech meets music dinner salons at my home in Nashville. Okay, so this guy had read my profile. How did he tell me he read my profile? When it was time to ask me questions, his question was, what was your favorite game ever that you kept the score for? I was blown away, like completely. My brain was exploding. He actually stunned me enough for a second. I didn't have an answer. And then I said, the only game I've kept score at where I wasn't at the game, Cal Ripken's last All-Star game. Now, the timing of this is really cool because a week from Saturday, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of his streak of consecutive games played. So anyway, that was the coolest question I've ever been asked in 12,000 interviews. And I actually think of that guy every time I pass the room where I have the replica jersey that Ripken wore at the Seattle-based All-Star game his last year in the big leagues. So questions can really make impact. And believe you me, I made darn sure that guy made it to the next round. Now, I'd love to know, what's one question you wish you'd asked in a past interview? And I also want to know, what's your second aha so far? Let me know. Now we're ready for step 3. And, we do have to go with the music theme. So we're going to rock the first and last 5 minutes. I know it's Nashville, but we do all the music. Trust me. My voice teacher teaches jazz. Like, we do all the music. Okay. The first 5 is positioning. The last 5 is impression. So think about what you want the first thing they hear from you to be. Now, you may or may not have control of that, but you want to be prepared for what you want to say the first moment you have a chance to speak on the interview. That's probably going to be something about why you're excited to be there and something that talks about your value. Then the last 5. Gratitude, people. Thank them, reaffirm your interest, and yes, of course, you want to ask about next steps. Now, I do want to remind you that sending a thank you note is not optional. I had a client the other day who confessed on one of his one-on-ones that it had been 10 days since he had an interview and he still hadn't sent the thank you note. And ironically, in the call, the person interviewing him had said, I'm going to send you X. And she hadn't sent it yet. Well, he hadn't sent a thank you note or followed up about the X. We fixed that. But you're going to thank them on the call, and then you're going to send a written thank you note. Now, I want to know, have you ever walked out of an interview unsure, walked out, turned off the Zoom, unsure if you made the right impression? I'd like you to think about everything we talked about today, and I want you to make note of what you would do differently next time. You can share it in the comments if you want, but I want it in your notes. And it's time for your third aha. What's one action you're going to take in your next interview? Now, if you have interview questions, drop them in the comments. I'll get back to them, if not later today, over the weekend. I promise. But what if you want support? DM me the word interview, and I'll get you coaching options. I offer standalone interview prep sessions. Can you imagine having 12,000 interviews worth of experience behind you in your next interview? It is game-changing. And for people looking for their next job in their career, I have a job search strategy coaching program. And for people who actually aren't sure what they want to be when they grow up, well, I have a program for that. Now, I want to recap because I'm in teacher mode here. I want to make sure that you got the important stuff. Step 1, star stories help you answer clearly and demonstrate results. They want to know what you can do for them. Step 2, smart questions help you choose wisely. Step 3, your first and last 5 minutes create memorability. I want you to remember you're not just being interviewed, you're interviewing them. Want one-on-one interview prep support? DM me interview. I'll send you the details. And if you know someone in a job search, share this them. Thanks for joining. Go rock your next interview.